Why are we so scared to face ourselves? Why is this? I honestly have spent so much of my life being scared of something, and I'm just getting tired. This element of myself, or this reflection of myself, has hindered me way too long that I just need to face it. This reflection of me has been with me for over 15 years, and I've never wanted to face them. I've never wanted to say all the things I needed to say because I always felt like I could just suppress them. I could just make them go away. I could just cut every cord, dismantle every contract. I could do everything in my power just to eradicate this version of myself or this reflection of myself. And as time goes on, I keep realizing, I'm like, what's the one thing I haven't done? And it's face them. There's a story I want to share with you that I think ties into everything I'm trying to say. So, for the last 2 years, I've been challenged by spirit to do a lot of different channelings secretly to myself. I don't really share too much. I've shared some of it, not all of it, but as I did these channelings, I started to realize more and more about my, let's say, spiritual existence outside of here. And I kept being motioned to this idea that there are elements of the creatrix that we are told to suppress here on this planet. We are lied to for most of our lives. And that brings me to that statement about the 12 and why 12 and not 13. Because so many of those elements are staring at us right in the face and we're told not to look at them. One of the elements that I've noticed in this last year is that as a woman, I am very much in tune with the moon. The moon shapes my cycle. The moon moves me, ebbs and flows. And I literally can get to every full moon, and that celestial orb is controlling my body. And yet, I've never even gotten to know about lunar cycles, or I've never been shown in this world about lunar cycles. And so much so that when I looked into it, I was even more ashamed of myself to realize that there's actually 13 zodiac signs. So I was like, oh, there's another layer of things that were lied to from the beginning of existence. You know, I always thought I was a Libra sun rising and a Pisces moon, but really I find out I'm just a Virgo. Not that there's anything wrong with Virgos, but it's like how much of our lives is shown and broadcasted these lies that shape us. And earlier on in my channelings, I was shown this 13th dimension, or this, as I've later come to realize that there is a 13th dimension. There's more, but the 13th is important. And I started realizing that 13 is an important number. You know, we all know about a baker's dozen. It's really not 12, it's 13. There's, buildings in this planet that literally hop, skip, and jump over 13 because it's seen as this woohoo superficial number. And really and truly, it's like, why are we made to feel this way? Why are we brought up feeling this way? Is it because of movies like Friday the 13th as 80s and 90s children? That we always think it's so superstitious? Or is it because of the Knights Templars all being massacred on Friday the 13th, 1307? That's a date that's just like washed over and made to be smaller than. And those same men, those Knights Templars, were ones that were trying to fight for, this truth, the truth of the divine feminine, the truth that the divine feminine existed in our day to day that was washed away by the church. The Julian calendar was by Julius Caesar, who made it into 12 months. And the same man that made sure that we forgot about Ophiuchus, the 13th zodiac. And the 13th zodiac, which represented the snake charmer, the snake bearer. And why is this elusive lie always brought to the forefront that we don't even know? Why is 13 the exact number that's brought up by the primordials? Why are all the aspects of God up to the number 13 and not 12? And why are we asked not to look at those and not even believe that God is Mother, Father, God? The suppression is so strong in our day to day. All of nature shows us that it's a Mother, Father, God. And yet we're told by the society we live in not to even look at it, not to even understand it. It was always name of the Father, the Mother, Son. Amen. This Holy Spirit was actually, manufactured. Mother God that was suppressed. So much of the feminine was suppressed in our lives. And that's the aspect of myself that's been suppressed all this time, and why I never even faced the version of myself that's been staring at me for these last 13 years. So, because I've been on this journey of finding the divine feminine within myself, I was asked to, channel this 13th, dimensional place. And what I found there were the rubrics of the creatrix. What I found were the building blocks of the creatrix. I wouldn't say that they were so much entities as they were embodiments of the aspects of the all source. And in those creatrix aspects, that would be like, let's say, the primary colors like red and blue and yellow and green. And, all of those primary colors, when they're actually mixed together, can create all the other colors and all the other creations of color. So when I was shown over this last year to delve more into this, and I always do follow Yeshua and all of his wisdom as I am moved by spirit to do so, Yeshua had asked me to go looking for the book of the Pistis Sophia. Now, the Pistis Sophia is a Gnostic text. A Gnostic text from Nag Hammadi. Nag Hammadi is a place in Upper Egypt where they found these scrolls, canonical texts, where after Jesus dies, he's, around for 40 more days. And he shares the story of Pistis Sophia with the last of, or his truest, let's say, followers of that time, which was Mary Magdalene, Matthew, Thomas. And he talks to them. It's like upper next level knowledge. It's upper next level ascension criteria that, Jesus will always profess in the most allegorical way. But basically this aeon, okay? And I started to learn about the aeons. I didn't have a name for them when I first channeled them. I thought they were called archaeons, like angels, like archangels. But there was this idea that for every aeon, there was a negative connotation associated with that aeon, or like a reciprocal version of that aeon that was descended down to this level of existence. So over this last year, Jesus had motioned to me to read these books, the Apocrypha of John. And in the first writings of Apocrypha of John, it was like, in the first, there was she. And when they speak of she, Pistis Sophia is a Latin term, right? The only other terms you would find representing this figure or this creatrix, this female creatrix, would be Shekinah or Barbello. And this version of Mother God had been suppressed so deeply that Yeshua in my time has been showing me to get more familiar and more recognizable with this divine feminine that has been squashed. So when I read the story of Pistis Sophia, basically she was this wisdom, or the aspect, the rubric, like the primordial, color wheel that I was talking about of the creatrix of the all, who decided at some point that she wanted to understand or come down, through all the aeons, because the 13th aeon, the pleroma, is where she inhabited, much like all the other aspects of the creatrix inhabited. And like I said, when I channeled earlier on a couple years back, I was shown this 13th realm, and I was shown that because we all have aspects, like I described in earlier videos, that basically my 12th I thought was the top. And then I realized, no, there's that 13th level that oversees my descendancy and my own aspects of my own higher selves. We all have them, guys. I'm just letting you know. Please learn to tap into them, because you need to understand all the parts of that you are in this world and in this life, because that's, the goal. So I start reading about this Pistis Sophia. She decides to descend down. And as she decides to descend down, the demiurge is created, that reciprocal agent of hers. But even in still, she is the epitome of God's light, or seen as the epitome, one of the epitomes, or one of the rubrics, or one of the let's say, she was willing to come down in a sense to be the formation of a physical God head, let's say, living in the demiurge, meaning the actual formation of her creation was the demiurge. By her stepping away from the 13th aeon, created the demiurge. And the demiurge is actually the illusionary world that we live in, full of all these beautiful lies that are staring at us right in the face. So her actual her trajectory down, she was also, brought in with this one counterpart, which Yeshua described to be himself. And she followed this characteristic of wisdom all through the ages. And what's funny is that after reading this story and realizing at this last moment when I realized about Ophiuchus, and Ophiuchus was the snake charmer, snake bearer, that idea of snake came up and I was like, wow, something right in front of my face I never knew about. And I was like, there's the snake bearer. Again, this elusive snake that's really represents wisdom all through, let's say, what is that, antiquity, okay? Because all through antiquity the snake was representative of wisdom. If you could see it as the caduceus that we have with our health system, if you could see it as what we represent as DNA, and that would be the most ultimate gnosis of creatrix that one could understand is our DNA. If there was this understanding that this divine feminine could share, much like the story of Adam and Eve, this snake, aka perhaps Sophia, was trying to show these poor souls in the demiurge that she created ultimately that they had this attachment to source, that they were these children of God, and that they could get out of this demiurge with the aid of this gnosis. But ultimately, the story got spun because we all know that the stories that be for the church, the Christian church, the Catholic church, the Bible we all read was such a mishmash. You know what I mean? Here's a point in time where, there's the Jews, there's the, the Gnostics, there's the pagans. They're all following these different religions, all from their sections of the world: Europe, North Africa, Africa, Asia, all of them. And they needed to figure out a way that they could combine all these stories. Ergo, why that Nordic story about the feast is very similar to the Last Supper. Was it the same story? We don't know. But was it that these parallels are all through the Bible in different ways? Ergo, why the story of PC Sophia being wisdom could be representational of the snake, and why the story of Adam and Eve is the way and structured the way it is, where for the rest of our existence, the women would be shamed as that who broke us, in a sense, that we're the ones who shamed our existence. But really, we could look at it even deeper and longer in our past, when we could look at the story of Ninhursag and Enki. Again, Ninhursag being represented by the snake, because she was seen as that who had the gnosis of genetic splicing in that story, which was way earlier than the story of Adam and Eve, goes back way farther. And all of this, of what I'm trying to say, is that for some reason this oppression exists, that we are not to know of our mother, we are not to know of the divine feminine, and we're not to be able to face that intrinsic part of ourselves, that more vulnerable place. And that's the part of me that I wasn't willing to face. So I think that's why Yeshua wanted me to read this story, get to know P.S.D. Sophia, get to know the canonical version of her essence in our everyday lives. And it brought me to this understanding of why 13 might be very intrinsically in tune with why things are always, brought to the forefront and washed away. And then it was interesting because in the day of Jesus, we would have seen Mary Magdalene as the one that he loved. She would have been the representation of Sophia at that time. She would have been his counterpart. And the thing is that in the story of P.C. Sophia, Jesus was Pistis's counterpart. Because all of these elements of God, the 13 I spoke of that were in the 13th aeon, all had these things called syzygies, which were the reciprocal, a soul being split into two. And in essence, it was the masculine, feminine of one soul. Back to that whole idea of twin flames. But that's just today's modern twist, in this esoteric world. But the syzygies in this instance, that P.S.D. Sophia being the feminine and Jesus being the masculine version of the same, Jesus was helping P.S.D. Sophia as she descended down. At what date and time, we don't know. We don't know how far back reaching this story goes. But for some reason, Yeshua's consciousness was right there with her to help her remember who she was all through the demiurge. And the negative aspects of those 13 were seen as what we would call archons. And the archons would have been the, let's say, the rulers of the demiurge, or where we all live in our modern day, in matter. Matter was equated to the demiurge because that's where the illusions could arise. The closer to actual matter we live in, the more disconnected we are from source, from the all, from our actual spark, from our actual inheritance, from our actual descendancy. So the more we forget where we come from, the more we forget about our power, the more we forget about our connection to God, the better off we are with these archonic, let's say they equated it to the demiurge. That was the name for it. But realistically, in the text, it would have been Yaldabaoth. And you could see in some instances that Yaldabaoth could have been seen as Yahweh. And we all know in the Old Testament that the real, true version of God that was really embodying the benevolent version of God, and that would have been attached to Adonai and El and Elohim. And what's interesting is that we always say that it's Yahweh for the Jewish people, but realistically, why do all the angels have the word El at the end of them? Mikael, Raphael, Uriel, Samuel, Shamuel, Adiel, Radiel, Zadkiel, Haniel, Hazrael, Castiel. They all have El at the end of them, right? So it's interesting because the actual benevolent version of the all creator, creatrix, mother, father, creatrix that they came from, our Adonai of Lord, that was kind of washed away with this whole principality of this idea of a monotheistic Yahweh, who was a malevolent version of God. And you can see the complete changeover, because here was this all-loving God, and then all of a sudden this malevolent God who's teaching things like genocide and who's teaching things like pain and suffering shows up. And it's like, do we not see that right in front of our faces and we just ignore it? It's the same idea. And it would have been Pisces who was trying to showcase to the humans that their source came from a bigger and greater creator, and that we were all part of that, and that we should not pay attention to the malevolency and find that inner benevolency within ourselves. And ultimately, what I found is that the more I tap into this and the more I understand it, I was really shaped by that idea recently of just finding Ophiuchus, because Ophiuchus represented the snake bearer. And like I said, the snake has run through all of antiquity. As I started learning how to channel and I started being taught by Yeshua, I started realizing that there were certain bodies, and this was a trip out. You have to understand, this just came to me in the last days, is that I always praised out to certain female entities and ascended masters, be it that they were Isis, Mary Magdalene, Kali Ma, and Kuan Yin, and Green Tara. I always reach out to these beings as, solace in this world. And would you believe that when I actually went looking for them today, actually, I was really shocked that all of them, including Mother Mary too, all have the depiction of the snake wrapped around their foot, or they're working with the snake, or they're working. So I was like, I'm like, all of the queens that I reach out to, these priestesses and these higher elemental beings in the divine feminine also hold this. Not to mention Inanna, not to mention Ashura, all of these divine feminine beings that would have been let's say, these fragmented, realistic embodiments of the Pisces in form, all were working with the asp or the snake. And it's funny because, like I said, this connotation to 13 is so drilled into our brains. And the last thing I want to mention is about that iconic dispelling of the Knights Templars, the men who would have taken over for the Catholic Church as the Catholic Church was trying to admonish and get rid of the divine feminine all through antiquity. They would have been the first to get the gnosis. They would have been the first to get the books, to get the art, to get the actual riches. And that's why the church wanted to get rid of them in the first place. But was it that? Or was it that the Knights Templars were trying to uphold the divine feminine? Because all through their time, all they did was erect churches and erect castles and fortifications all over the modern world of their time in the 14th, 13th century. And every single one of them was pointing towards the divine feminine, aka at that time, Mary Magdalene especially, because she would have been the counterpart of Yeshua in the living of his time. the Zysagy to Yeshua. And I mean, that took place on Friday the 13th, 1307, another iconic 13. And the last one I'll leave you with is this. The order was never ended. The Ordem de Cristo continued on in Portugal. And there's a beautiful, beautiful erection of this. And their headquarters was in Tomar. There's so many beautiful artifacts that are found in Portugal. And if you're very interested in Atlantis yourselves, you guys should look into the Açores, into those islands off of Portugal. There's a lot of artifacts. And even in the Algarve, there's a 7,000-year-old cosmic egg there that's very interesting to check out. But hey, what do I know, right? And if you are looking for Atlantis, I'd say it's not in Greece. I'd say it's over there. But let's not go into all that in this episode. But realistically, I just wanted to share this because I am going through this transformation. I am going to have to face this part of myself. I am going to have to love the part of me that I've tried to suppress for so long. I am going to have to let down my guard, and I am going to have to understand the divine feminine in all its aspects. I've already been doing it, and I didn't even know. I didn't even know how fraught this number 13 was. And the next challenge I have in this next week's is to delve in deeper into this number 13, and also go into the last point that I'll make, because that 13 number kind of stuck out to me, and I was like, isn't that something to do with the Philosopher's Stone? And you'll never guess what I just found, but I'm going to wait for the downloads on that. The alchemical number 13 points to the word phosphorus, or phosphorus would have been the new transformative alchemical material that changed and transformed the world too. But would you remember in one of my videos where I talked about Jesus and Mary being of the Davidic line, and also John the Baptist, and how there was all these different, morning stars. And in the Greek, the name morning star referred to Lucifer. And Lucifer, the actual god of Lucifer, and the name that was given to that morning star in the Greek was phosphorus. So I found that very interesting recently, and I was like, oh, there's another rabbit hole to go down, that alchemically the Philosopher's Stone, or those that practice in alchemy and magic with the G, magic with the J, high magic, whatever way you want to put it. And funny enough, in a proper coven, 13 is the number you need for a proper coven. So it's going to point me in another direction of exploration of self. But I will get around to facing my dragon, and I will get around to being the embodiment of all that I am. I didn't want to face him. I didn't want to be him. I didn't want to see all the parts of myself that I didn't want to be representative in this life. But to ultimately know who I am is to know him. And to know him is to love him. And even if we don't connect in this lifetime, we are already connected, and we are. We just are. We always will be for all time. So it doesn't matter. And I'm so happy that that being helped me out with that. And the next time I see his channeler, I'm going to totally do a shout out, because he was a great entity to tap into to help me through this process. So I'm okay with being in love with the dragon. I'm okay with admiring and accepting all the parts of myself and delving deeper into my divine feminine, because in order to help my counter, I need to embody all that I am. So I'm going to do that. You just watch me. Bye for now.